Welcome back to Voices in Mystery. Our next mystery author with us today is Albert Bell, who comes from the Michigan area. Welcome back.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Albert's been on the program before and is a professor of history at Hope College, but that's not why we're talking to him today. We're talking to him about a historical book called The Blood of Caesar, which is actually a sequel. So maybe we should back up one book. Tell us about your Roman books.
The two books that I have in the Roman series are about Pliny the Younger, who is a historical figure from the late 1st century AD. I've studied about him a lot in my scholarly work. And several years ago, I decided he has a kind of a skeptical attitude about things. He's inquisitive about things. He would make an interesting investigator, an interesting sleuth. And so I have turned him into a detective.
Pliny himself?
Pliny himself, yes. Accompanied by the historian Tacitus, who was a good friend of his, and we have letters that they wrote and so on. So that much of it is historical, but the cases that they're investigating, of course, are simply my creation.
In the real world, the nonfiction world, is it Tacitus that has informed the rest of us about Pliny to begin with?
No, we have Pliny's letters, almost 250 letters that Pliny wrote, so we can get a good sense of who he was and what he was about. But Tacitus, Tacitus tells us a lot about the time period in which Pliny lives, and so the two of them work together very well.
So the first of those two novels was what?
Was called All Roads Lead to Murder.
Okay.
For some reason, the phrase, I sort of like punny titles, and all roads lead to Rome, so
right.
All Roads Lead to Murder. And then I thought, well, if it's going to be a mystery, it's going to happen while somebody's traveling. And so I went back and looked at what we know of Pliny's life and found a time period when he would have been traveling and set the murder that way. It takes place in what would be modern-day Turkey.
And then the next book, the current one, The Blood of Caesar?
The Blood of Caesar.
Set that one up.
That one is set in Rome shortly after Pliny and Tacitus have returned. There's really only a few months lapse between the two books. And the Emperor Domitian wants Pliny to investigate something. And of course, when the Emperor asks you to do something, you have to do it.
Will there be a third and fourth Roman series book?
Oh, I sure hope so. But it took me too long to do the second one. I just found it a very difficult book to write until I finally hit a point where something broke loose and I realized that's where the story needed to go. I actually wrote 3 other books in the gap between these two just because I'd get blocked and I'd just turn and do something else for a while.
Now, your scholarly publications as an historian are also of this era?
I have a book called Exploring the New Testament World, which is about the life of the 1st century, the culture of the 1st century, and how it fits into the background of the New Testament. And then I have what I guess would be a sort of semi-scholarly book. It's called Perfect Game, Imperfect Lives. It's about the perfect game that Don Larson pitched in the 1956 World Series.
Sure.
And I was 11 years old at the time, and a couple of years ago, when we were coming up on the 50th anniversary of that, I decided to just do some reflection on it and think about my experience. And it turned out to be a kind of social history as well as an autobiography.
Oh, that is great. What else did you write?
I have written a children's mystery novel called The Secret of the Lonely Grave. And it's set in Kentucky. It's a contemporary book, but it relates to the Civil War, the Underground Railroad. There are 2 11-year-olds who investigate. One is a white boy and the other is an African-American girl. And the book has won a couple of awards. I've been very pleased with that and has gotten some nice reviews.
What's the age range for the reader?
5th, 6th grade.
Okay. Is it the kind of book that can be read aloud
I have had a number of teachers who've used it in class.
Oh, that's
I've
wonderful.
spoken at some schools, and it's been a lot of fun, to have a chance to go into a classroom and talk to children about it. And I've also done one that's set in West Michigan, where I live. There are a lot of Dutch people around West Michigan, and so I wrote a mystery called Death Goes Dutch. Again, sort of a punny kind of title. But there's a young woman in there who is a social worker, and she reunites adoptive children with their biological families. And in this case, there are some reasons why the family doesn't really want this young man to be recognized as a member of their family, including a large trust fund and some other things.
Do you set that book in Holland, Michigan?
Well, it's set in Grand Rapids and the surrounding area. Grand Rapids is about 30 miles from Holland.
So Now, in your professorial life, the kind of writing you do that brings you to our television show is not the kind of writing that might get a professor promotion and tenure, right?
Right.
And so do you have to conceal the fact that you're a writer, or how have you merged your two worlds of fiction writing with your scholarly writing?
Well, I'm very fortunate in that the college where I teach does not have a publish or perish sort of mentality. And the Exploring the New Testament World book was a scholarly work, and I think has been well received. I've also done a number of articles and reviews and that kind of scholarly writing. But they recognize the value of, for instance, the Lonely Grave book. If it ends up being used in schools, yeah, it's a novel, but it's also useful as an educational tool. So there's not a lot of pressure on me to deny what I'm doing. They're pretty happy about it.
Do you do most of your writing in the summer?
No, I am able, as a senior member of the department, I'm able to schedule my courses the way I want to, and I can bill some blocks of time. And so once I've got class preps done and papers graded and that kind of thing, I have some time to write.
The three of the books that you've talked about today are based on historical facts. Because you're a historian, is it your desire to, for the fiction reader to learn history as they move through a fiction book?
Yeah, I think so. I never want to be didactic, though. I don't want to beat somebody over the head. And I'm always wary of historical novels that you take a page or two and back up and dump the info in there that you want people to have. My editor and my writers group both keep me honest about that. Don't give us a big info dump. Just work it in gradually. The more you can have it worked in, say, in conversation between people or something like that, the better it is.
Mm-hmm. And they crossed into Indiana for the most part, or Ohio, which were non-slave states?
Right. Slaves coming up from the deeper south, say from Alabama and Mississippi, would come up through Kentucky. This book is set in Cadiz, which is over in the western part of the state, and very close to the Tennessee line, in a place where a lot of slaves would have crossed over. And then that part of Kentucky is pretty narrow. And
Well, I certainly thank you for coming on to our show, Voices in Mystery, today. We've been talking about Albert Bell, who really has a variety of books to talk about, because he's got the Romans series, the most recent of which is The Blood of Caesar, a juvenile novel, which is The Secret of the Lonely Grave, and Death Goes Dutch, which kind of reflects the area where he currently lives. So, Albert, thank you so much for being on the program, and come back often.
My pleasure. Thank you.